Welcome to the NFL MVP Momentum Podcast. I'm Sam Holcroft, joined alongside Payton Thompson. Before we begin, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP, follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast, and check out our YouTube channel at MVP Momentum Podcast. So, PT, over the last month, we have done top 5 offensive trios, top 5 defensive trios, and now we're going to do a specific ranking for a quarterback group, and that is probably what is determined as the most important most important position group, and that's the quarterbacks. So you came up with your list of your top 10 quarterbacks. I came up with mine. So let's go ahead and get right into it.
Let's dig into it.
So obviously we could probably skip number 1, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep, because it's Trevor Lawrence. No, I'm kidding. It's Pat Mahomes, right?
Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah, I don't think that you can really make a case for him not to be number 1. I mean, not yet. I mean, Joe Burrow, he's been great for the last 2 seasons, but I don't even think you can put him up there. I mean, he's been to the Super Bowl 3 of the last 4 years. I don't think anyone else on this list has made it to the Super Bowl twice. So,
right. yeah, that's definitely the biggest thing I think is the winning part of it. Like, I think a lot of these guys in our top 5 specifically are going to have nice stats, and they're going to have things that maybe they do slightly better than Mahomes, but nobody wins like Mahomes. And ultimately in the NFL, that's what it's about. It's about winning. And he's just been the most consistent winner. And when you look at some of these other guys, like you said before, they really just haven't scratched the surface on how much winning that Mahomes has done. So, yeah, I think it honestly comes down to that. But, he has everything else. He has the leadership, the intangibles, the physical profile, the IQ. He has everything. So, yeah, he's definitely our number 1.
All right. So then who do you have as number 2?
So you alluded to him. My number 2 is Joe Burrow. I think the way that he's been coming up lately, these past couple years, the stats that he's put up, I think relatively to how good his team is, putting up wins at a fair amount. Last year, I think if he didn't have that stinker game, people would have looked at him a lot differently at the end of the season as far as maybe closer to the MVP vote. But, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me from Joe Burrow, even when he was with LSU, is his leadership. He's always kind of had that leadership, I don't know if you want to call it not really a chip to his shoulder, but you can kind of just tell he has that extra it about him. Just kind of how he comes out, how he prepares, how he leads his guys, and him being a young guy and also leading honestly a really young team on the offensive end, I think is really impressive. And I really just, since he's come into the league, I don't think we've seen many peaks and valleys. I think we've kind of just seen a steady up or a steady incline rather. So, I really like what Joe Burrow's done, and I think he's definitely firmly in top 3, but he's my number 2.
Yeah, he's my number 2 as well. I don't really have too much to add to that. I just think that, if there's anyone that's going to pass Patrick Mahomes as the best quarterback in the league, it's Joe Burrow, but he's going to have a sensational year this year, and Pat would have to have a pretty average year, even by Patrick Mahomes standards, in order for him to take that. But I feel like that number 1 and 2 are like, it's a huge gap between them and number 3, 4, 5, and so on. So
yeah,
I could bring up my number 3, and I don't know if you're gonna like it, PT, but I joked about him earlier, but I have Trevor Lawrence as my 3rd best quarterback in the league. I mean you've heard me ever since about halfway through the season last year. I am high on the Jaguars. I am high on Trevor Lawrence. Watching him grow from even within his rookie year after Urban Meyer got fired and everything that happened, and he was just able to ball out, and like he had a good second half of his rookie year. First half was horrible. They just didn't know what was going on. Urban Meyer wasn't ready for the NFL, and there was just so much turmoil there. Last year, stability. He was great. Led them on that 7 or 8 game win streak, including a 27-0 comeback over the Chargers. And I'm looking forward. I mean, this guy's been a baller in high school, in college, and I mean, even in the NFL, even though he's been in the league for 2 years. I have high expectations for him not only this year, but I think this guy's going to be a future MVP.
Wow. Honestly, I can't say I'm too surprised about you putting him at three. He is on my list, but he's nowhere close to three. But honestly, I don't really have any problem with your reasoning. I think, I mean, maybe we should have established this before, but I think it kind of depends on how we categorize or kind of what we want to see in the top quarterbacks, right? And I think everything you said is correct. He really didn't get much help, and I'll dig a little bit deeper when I have him a little bit later on my list. But the thing that kind of sticks out to me that he doesn't have that my guy at number three does have is just the experience and the proven statistics, right? And I think Lawrence can definitely be up there with this guy talent wise, but I don't think right now it's just really hard for me to put him over Josh Allen. With the consistency that Josh Allen's been able to put up as far as winning in the league, and also the raw statistics of it are really hard to match for how long he's been doing it now. Is it what is it, 5 or
I
6
think
years?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's had one of the best receivers in the game, so you kind of have to give him that too. And the offensive system was kind of created for Josh Allen as well. But I just think when you look at his physical prototype, there's not a ton of guys like him. I think you can kind of compare him to like a Justin Herbert or maybe to a lesser extent Mahomes, but just those big arm guys that are able to deliver the pinpoint passes. And there's just not a whole ton of guys like that in the league right now. And so, yeah, I just think from a talent standpoint and the consistency, I got Josh Allen at number three. What do you think about that?
Um, so last year, you, me, Sean, and Zeke all got on. We were going to record a podcast, and unfortunately, technology didn't work. But I had Josh Allen as my seventh best quarterback at that time, and all you guys were flaming me for it. And I didn't really have that good of a case then. I don't have him at seven this year, but I have him at five. So
Okay.
I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just feel like the difference on why I put Lawrence there, even though Allen does have experience, he's been to just one AFC championship game,
Hmm.
been in a bunch of big time games, but the result has always been the same, a loss.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, Trevor Lawrence was in a big time game last year against the Chiefs, and that was a loss. But guess what? That was his second playoff game, and he also came back 27-0 on the Chargers. So that's
Hmm.
the biggest thing there. And also, it's like turnovers is huge. Josh Allen
Yeah.
had the most turnovers last year. How many more games could they have won last year? Could they have been the number one overall seed if he didn't turn over the ball? I think it was like 20 plus times. So
Yeah.
that's just one of the biggest things for me with Josh Allen. Um, but moving on to my number four, I actually have Justin Herbert. I feel like, I mean, he had one of the greatest rookie campaigns that we have seen in a long time in 2020. And he's a slinger. He's got a great receiving room, even though they just added another receiver, Quentin Johnston. That's going to be phenomenal. He's got Austin Eckler out of the backfield. So he's in a position to be successful. And he has the talent to be successful, even if he didn't have those positions. You put those together. I said Trevor Lawrence is going to be a future MVP. Wouldn't be surprised if Justin Herbert is a future MVP as well. I think he's in a system that can work for him, a pass first system. He could throw for 400 yards any game. Um, he does kind of make some bad decisions at times, but I mean that's just with being young. Over time, he'll fix it.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that. We kind of line up here as well. Justin Herbert's also my fourth quarterback. I mean, yeah, I don't think I have too much to add or subtract on what you said. I think one of the biggest things too about his career so far is that I think the receivers and the offensive line just really haven't stayed healthy, and it's sometimes the defense can only do so much, and so sometimes when the offense comes up short, it's kind of hard not to look at the quarterback, not to look at the receivers, and or even the play calling and the coaching on the offensive side. So, yeah, I mean, I think his situation is really good, and that's kind of partly for me why he's not a little bit higher because I think if you talk about talent, he could be up there with Mahomes and Burrow here. But when you talk about winning and kind of utilizing what you have, he's just not on that type of level. Because I think honestly, if you gave Joe Burrow this kind of team, if they're healthy, they probably go further than he's taken them. So that's kind of why I think we both have him at 4 and not in that upper echelon of elite quarterback play. But like you said, he can put up the statistics. He can definitely will them to wins. But it's just as of right now, he's just not in that extra category because he does a couple of those things that you mentioned. Josh Allen does, forcing the turnovers, not making the greatest decisions, stuff that Mahomes doesn't do in those big moments that results in him winning. And obviously, it's not just on the quarterback; it's a lot of things. But the quarterback is kind of the head of the snake, so that's why he's, I think, fourth for us. But now at number 5, I think this is where we're going to get a little bit of discrepancy and a little bit of hot takey. So at number 5, I have Lamar Jackson. Um, I think I think with talent and he's in the right scheme, but with the right talent, I think it's hard to say that he's not statistically and talent wise up there with guys that I have through the 6 through 10 range. Because when you look at his mobility, now I understand he's been hurt, but if we're going under the pretenses that he's healthy, and that's what we're going by, I think it's super hard not to put him in the top 5. Um, or even, I don't think he would go anywhere in the top 1 through 4, but it's really hard to not put him over guys that I have 6 through 10 at that point when you talk about his dual threat ability. And I think he can be a smarter player than maybe what he shows sometimes. But I think one of the biggest things has just been his injuries. I think if he's healthy and he wins a lot more games, I think it's a lot harder to say he's not up there with guys like Herbert or Allen. But since he's been hurt and he hasn't played games, I think the recency thought is that he's not worth as much as the other quarterbacks are worth. And I think that's totally fair. I think that's completely valid. And he did get a big payday, and we'll kind of talk about that in the next episode about was that worth it or not. But with that being said, talent wise, I think he deserves to have the 5 spot.
Um, I'm just going to skip over Lamar Jackson for a bit. I'll talk about him in a while, and when I mean a while,
Okay.
I mean a while. So my number 5, I have Josh Allen, and I mean at the end of the day, skill wise, he's up there. Winning wise, he can be up there, but in big games, he has proven that just can't get it done. Now, obviously, there was that one game where the Chiefs had 13 seconds, the Bills were up, and they got down in 2 plays to field goal range, tie it, overtime, and then we know what happened after that.
Oh.
But other than that, I mean, they got destroyed at home last year against the Bengals. This was like a defining moment for me, and that the repercussions of that loss is still lingering because of everything that's going on with Stephon Diggs and mini camps and all that stuff. So I feel like with Josh Allen, we were talking about Joe Burrow and his leadership. Josh Allen's a great leader, but you also have to lead your team in those big games. And honestly, he just got overshadowed by Joe Burrow in that game. So that's why I have Josh Allen at 5. Um, I just couldn't put him over Lawrence or Herbert in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
And go ahead.
I was just going to move on to number 6.
Yeah, you can go on to number 6.
All right. So number 6 is someone who we haven't mentioned yet. Kind of surprised how far he's fallen since, they just were in the Super Bowl last year. But I had Jalen Hurts. Now, 2 years ago when he had Devontae Smith, I thought Jalen Hurts was a good quarterback. Then they just ran into the Bucs at the wrong time. They just weren't ready for him. And then they get A.J. Brown, and Jalen Hurts looks good. And he's one of those quarterbacks. He's the first quarterback that I have on my list that's like a running style quarterback that's like strict running style, like Josh Allen kind of, but like Jalen Hurts more so. But I feel like Jalen Hurts is a lot better passer. than someone like a Justin Fields or someone who you just brought up, Lamar Jackson. You know, even though he's only thrown for almost 4,000 last year, I believe. Um, but I mean, it also helps when they were dominating in some of those games, so he didn't have to throw the ball as much. They were just
Mhm.
in the fourth quarter. They probably threw the ball 4 times, and that was on like third downs. Other than that, they were just handing the ball off to Miles Sanders, who was a 1,000-yard rusher.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. I have a few reasons why Hurts was a little bit lower on my list, but he's I'm about to get to him, but he is not my number six. My number six is actually Aaron Rodgers. Um, so I want to kind of wait on the Hurts stuff and kind of give my case for Aaron here. I think him coming off an MVP season a couple years ago, and the type of quarterback he is. I think it's been a long time since he's had a proper team that he's been able to work with. Maybe obviously the Packers had a solid defense, so you got to kind of give him that defense, and the Jets defense is going to be good as well. But I think it's been so long since he's had a real profile number one receiver, or even a competent receiving room. If we're being honest, he's had his dependable guys. Don't get me wrong. Throughout the years, Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson,
Devontae.
who almost am I missing? Devontae Adams, obviously, a couple years ago before he left last year. So yeah, I guess he had him. And obviously with a number one guy like that, he's going to look really good. And so I think when you put him in a proper situation like the Jets, who are primed to win now, I think he's going to look kind of. I don't want to say he's going to look the same as his MVP year because I don't think anybody should expect that. But I think he's going to look closer to that than he looked to last year, kind of fizzling out. And whether he's successful with the Jets this year or not, I think that's going to tell a lot about where he's at in his career. But to me, I still think Aaron Rodgers has a lot left in the tank. And as far as talent, IQ, I mean, maybe not talent, but so much as IQ, knowing how to win, I think he's up there with, Patrick Mahomes. But he's got to have the team around him to do it. And so that's why he's kind of fallen. And of course, you have to factor in his age and just, recently, not looking the greatest. You got to kind of have to put him down a little bit. So that's why he's my number six. But if you don't mind, I'm going to take number seven since we just kind of talked about Jalen Hurts, and he's my number seven. And I think this was the lowest I could put him because it is really hard to put him this low after coming off a Super Bowl. Obviously, they didn't win, but they made it there. And the year before, he was still successful as a rookie. Um, and I definitely don't disagree with anything you said. I think as far as him being able to win and play in the system and be the quarterback that they need and be that dual threat, but also be really effective on the ground and kind of play with that ground game, I think is really important. And I think this is definitely the guy that Sirianni wanted coming out of the draft. Now, with that being said, the reason why he's a little bit lower for me than he is for you is one, he had one really good year, and then he had a solid rookie year. I just need to see a little bit more consistency. Two, I feel like, and this is kind of maybe a little bit of projection, but as far as like projecting him on different teams, I think that he is very scheme dependent. I think he's one of those players that in a certain right scheme, he's going to be really, really good. But I think in another scheme, he may not be the same type of player. Now, that's very kind of what you think about Jalen Hurts and different teams like that. And then the third thing is, and you kind of preluded it before, is the defense and how dominant the defense was at times where the offense really didn't have to do a whole lot. And it was like when the offense got going and then they really didn't stop, they really didn't have much pressure to be in high pressure situations down the stretch. So, and of course, I give him all his flowers for the playoffs, and those are high pressure games, don't get me wrong. But I just need to see a little bit more consistency, and then I kind of have questions about his fit on other teams as well as if he went up against or went with a worse defense because the Eagles do have a top three defense and they're going to have a top five defense again this year.
Yeah, I can't really disagree with putting Hurts at 7, considering I had him at 6. But you did bring up a lot of good points. But I feel like it's kind of hard sometimes to judge how good a quarterback actually is because let's say you're a quarterback, you have the number one best defense in the league. They only give up 10 points a game. You only have to throw the ball maybe like 30 times at the very most in a game.
Yeah,
How many yards can you really get off of 30 attempts? As a running
right.
back, you're like, oh, sweet, I'm going to get a payday when my contract's up. But as
Yeah.
a quarterback, you're like here's the thing is like, you look at a bunch of quarterbacks. I mean, you can look at some of Tom Brady's best years. Some of his best years is when he didn't have good defenses. When he had
Mhm.
good defenses, he his stats were like tiers behind.
Yeah.
So I mean, depend how good your defense really is. Like and like then there's I mean like look at the Chiefs for example. They don't have one of the best defenses, but Patrick Mahomes led the league in passing last year.
Yep.
If they had the best defense, if you put Patrick Mahomes on the San Francisco 49ers, you know, is he throwing for almost 5500 yards? Probably not because they're probably going to be winning a lot of those games. He's not going to be throwing as much. So it's kind of like sometimes it's just dependent on how good your defense is. So I completely understand. It's like how good was Jalen actually last year?
Yeah.
So my number 7 was your number 6, and that was Aaron Rodgers. I agree with everything you said. Um, Last year was probably one of the worst first half of his first half of
Yeah.
the season that he's had maybe his entire career. Like it was rough. But he went back into MVP mode that second half of the year when they needed to make that playoff push. They ultimately didn't get it because the Lions wanted to play spoiler. But it just showed that Aaron, like if he didn't have that second half, he might not be on the Jets right now. He might have just gotten cut. In all honesty, if he didn't have that great of a second half of season last year. So I really think that Aaron Rodgers still has something in the tank and he has something to prove. Um, any year could be his last. I mean, he's been hinting at retirement for ever since he won his first of the back-to-back MVPs. You know, he's been hinting
Mhm.
at a retirement. Um, but I think that this is, like you said, this is a good receiving room for him. Good defense to be behind. They're in a great division that they can try to compete. I mean, the Dolphins are up and coming. You never know what the Patriots and Bill Belichick are going to do. The Bills are still probably the top dog there, so it's going to be
Mhm.
a competitive division. And I expect Rodgers to still go out there and prove he's got something left in the tank. So number 8, another guy we haven't brought up yet, someone who I think helped make you be a believer last year, and that's Daniel Jones.
Ah, Daniel Jones.
Yep.
DJ.
So looking at his stats last year, wasn't the most impressive. He only threw for 3,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. But PT, who was he throwing to?
Don't ask me, man. Couldn't tell you.
Darius Slayton for some games, Sterling Shepard for some games,
Mhm.
Galladay for some games, Saquon Barkley for most games. You know, like
Yeah.
he didn't have that
We
good
didn't
of a
have
receiving
anybody.
game. And he
Yeah.
still threw for 3,000 yards and had 15 touchdowns. You know, and like he had to do a lot of stuff running wise too, just to kind of keep them in games. I mean, the man ran for 700 yards last year. If I would have asked you before I told you how many yards, I said, how many yards did Daniel Jones run for last year? You probably would have said like maybe 400, you know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I didn't know that until I saw this. I'm like, wow, he ran for 700. So he almost had 4,000 yards combined last year. So Daniel Jones and like he just got paid, so he's gonna be balling out. You don't pay someone 40 million a year to only throw for 3,000 yards. I'll get to that statement here in a little bit. Um, but they acquired Darren Waller, which if he could stay healthy, that's going to be a huge addition. I'm
Yep.
expecting Daniel Jones to throw for at least 4,000 yards and have at least 21 touchdowns next year. He's proven, you know, after his first 2 years where he had kind of a really bad touchdown to interception ratio, where it was almost like 1.5 to 1 touchdowns to interceptions. Over the last few years, it's more of a 2 to 1, if not almost more. So he's really honed in on his decision making, and that's why I have him at 8.
Yeah. Honestly, you're right. He made a believer out of me, and I'm not sure exactly where I had him. I mean, I know he wasn't on my top 10 going into last year in the season. I'm not sure exactly where he would have been at, but And to be honest with you, man, like he's my number 10, so I kind of dig a little bit deeper into it, but I'll just save it for then. But my
Right.
number 8 is going to be who you had at number 3, and that is Trevor Lawrence, finally cracking my list. Um, and I think we kind of touched on this enough a little bit, kind of talking about the other quarterbacks as well. But I think he has the talent. He has the arm talent. He has the physical profile to be a great quarterback. I just need to see it come to fruition with the team that's going to be able to support him, and I think he's going to be able to do that. I just have to see it on paper first. And last year was a great year to see what he could do with even a competent team. The year before that, I've talked about this many times before. Many people were out on him after his rookie year, and I thought that was super weird because of how high profile of a prospect he was coming out of Clemson. And I honestly never gave up on him. I just wasn't sure what exactly his ceiling was going to be at the end of his career, or yeah, at the prime, I should say. So, I mean, I'm surprised, honestly. I mean, there's a lot of good quarterbacks in the league, man. I don't think there's necessarily a big gap between a guy like him and Lamar Jackson. But I think with Lamar Jackson winning an MVP, playing in slightly more playoff games, it just means a little bit more to me right now. But I think Trevor Lawrence could easily be a guy that's my biggest jumper from this year to next year. I think he could easily be 3 next year if they have enough success in the season. So as far as his talent, I really like him a lot, and I'm actually a Trevor Lawrence believer. But I just got to put him where I think he deserves to be at right now.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
So with Trevor Lawrence,
Mm-hmm.
I just need to bring up one thing. So I just asked you who Daniel Jones was throwing to last year. Trevor Lawrence threw for over 4,000 yards. Christian Kirk was a 1,000-yard receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Christian Kirk wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver with the Cardinals. Was he?
He wasn't, but I would say he's a good number 2.
No, he's a good number.
Team.
He's a good number 2. Marvin Jones Jr. He was with, I want to say Philly at one time.
Detroit.
And he was also with Detroit. Yes.
Yeah.
He'd be a solid number 2, right?
That's solid number 2. Yep.
Okay. And then you have Zay Jones, who was on the Raiders and the Bills. Solid number 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So he threw for 4,000. Oh, I'm missing Evan Ingram, who was on the Giants. They didn't want him anymore. I feel like he's a decent tight end. He'd be top 32. He's worthy of a starting spot. Right?
Yeah.
So he threw for 4,000 yards with someone who's worthy of a starting tight end spot and 3 number 2 wide receivers. I feel like that's pretty good. And they just added Calvin Ridley, so it's like maybe he could throw for 5,000 this year. He's got a decent receiving room. He's getting these players from teams that didn't want these guys anymore. The Raiders moved on from Zay Jones. They said, "Oh, we got Devontae Adams. We're good." Detroit moved on from Jones Jr. Jacksonville's like, "Hey, we'll take you." Christian Kirk got replaced with Hollywood Brown, so he went to Jacksonville for a new start. Evan Ingram, new start in Jacksonville, and what does Trevor Lawrence do with them? Throw for 4,000 yards.
Now, here's what I would say to that, and I want you to answer this question. How much did Doug Peterson have to do with that?
I would say setting up for success, 70%, like result-wise, like 45. 55 probably
Okay.
Trevor.
Okay.
Because here's the thing is like you will never have a quarterback in the top 10 list where the coach did not set them up for success. That's why
That's true.
That's why we don't have Justin Fields as a top 10 quarterback, because he's not set up for success. If he was, like, I was honestly contemplating it, but I'm like, his coaches don't set him up for success. That's why he's not going to be in the top 10. Every single one of these, even though I think it's Ryan Staley of the Chargers, has been butchering games for the last 2 years for the Chargers. Herbert's still up here because he's still so good.
Yeah.
So coaching, like once you set up your quarterback for success, he's going to run with it. And if they don't, then that just proves that you need a new quarterback.
Yeah, yeah, I'd completely agree. And like I said, I'm pretty high on Lawrence, like as a player myself. Um, and I would even maybe have put him over Jalen, but it's hard to do that when Jalen would just went to the Super Bowl, and Aaron Rodgers is a proven guy, year after year, MVP kind of guy. But I definitely don't disagree with you. I think he could be a big jumper when we do this list again. But
Yeah, I might be putting him a little high at 3, but
I mean,
here's the
but
thing.
you're basing it on what he could do, and I think that is an okay approach because ultimately that's what we're going to look back on, right? Is what did we say in July or June, and then how does it look in January and February? And I think that's
Right.
kind of what we're. So if he ends up being the third best quarterback, which I think he could be, then it was a good bet for sure. So for my number 9, this is also a guy we haven't mentioned, and I don't think he's going to crack your list. And I debated him not having him on my list at all, but I don't think, and he has a lot of other stuff that he dealt with before, that kind of I think based into this year. But I got Deshaun Watson, and I thought it was very interesting how last year obviously he had all the legal trouble before the last season went on, and then the season went on, and he came back after his suspension, and he didn't look the greatest. And I think he's going to be one of those guys that either shoots back into the top 6 or he maybe goes down to the middle of the pack kind of territory, depending on how he plays with the Browns and the kind of guys that he has to play around him. Because as of right now, I mean, I'm not sure I'm not sure what their receiving core is looking like. Obviously, they're going to have the running back room looking good. But yeah, I think when you look at a guy like Deshaun Watson before he went to the Browns, he was debatably a top 5 quarterback, and the stats kind of prove that. And then he had the kind of really rough last year, and I think he's kind of just been out of people's minds, or kind of been fading in people's minds, I should say, because he had that kind of rough second half of the season, and obviously he didn't play the first 9 games, so. And then the Browns they didn't make the playoffs. So I think that's another factor that people are, you kind of have to factor in. But I really want to see what Deshaun Watson is able to do with a full off season, really a full season with these guys because he didn't get to play the first 9 games. So I think it's hard to not put him in the top 10 with the kind of talent that he can be, but it's really going to depend on if he's able to get back to where he was at, because I think just as easily as he could get back to where he's at, I think he could, fade even further back into the mid teens to early 20s. So that's who I have at number 9.
Yeah, I didn't have Deshaun on my list. It's an interesting take, though. Um, I feel like he looked okay last
Mm-hmm.
year with that, what was it, the 7 game suspension or 11?
9, I think.
9? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so, we only get to see half of a season, but I mean, in 2020, I think that was the last year that he played
Yeah.
before
Played a full
last
season.
season. He
Mm-hmm.
led the league in passing.
Yep.
So, I mean, we know that he can be a top caliber player. Um, it's just I don't know if they have the receiving core for it. I still trust Amari Cooper, Peoples Jones. I like, um, but you also have a running back beast. In my opinion, probably third best running back in the league right now, in Nick Chubb.
Yep.
So it's hard. I mean, out of all the quarterbacks that we've talked about, how many of these guys have a top 5 running back? I don't think a single one.
I think it'd be debatable because I think Herbert could be debatable, but
Yeah,
really that would be the only guy. Yeah, that'd
yeah,
be the only guy.
and he doesn't even really he gets more receiving yards than he has rushing
Yeah,
yards
he's
too.
yeah.
So it's a wild card. So that's kind of why I wouldn't really put Deshaun up there. But I mean, I do like the take, and I mean, he's definitely. If I were to go through 11 through 15, he's definitely going to be in there for me.
Mm-hmm.
So my number 9. Now you know me. I try to take as much bias out as I can, but every now and again you got to sprinkle something in, especially when you own his jersey. Number 9, I have Derek Carr.
Yeah.
Now he's probably not on your list. Uh, I expect that from a Falcons fan. I understand, but I I really do think that he is still a top 10 quarterback in the league. Last year, he had 14 interceptions. He had 24 touchdowns. But I believe I went back and I saw a stat. I don't remember where I saw it, so I mean take it with a grain of salt. But in the last 5 years, I think Derek Carr has had the most non-at-fault interceptions in the league, which means basically bounces off his receiver's hands
Yeah.
and then it's an interception. I think Derek had 6 last year out of his 14. With Hunter Renfro being a big reason. Yeah, I'm not too happy about that. But but here's the thing with Derek Carr is if he didn't sit those last 2 games against San Francisco and Kansas City, he would have probably thrown for over 4,000 yards. That would have been 5 straight seasons of 4,000 yards passing. That's insane. He also has in his career, I mean, he's had, see, he's going on his 9th year. So in 8 years, he's had 33 game winning drives, 28 fourth quarter comebacks. And also, he has missed, this is a funny stat, in his 8 years, he has missed 2 games from injury. And last year, he sat 2 games. So he doubled his games missed in his entire career just by sitting last year. I
That
expect him
is a pretty crazy stat.
I expect him to have a good season with the Saints. You know, I mean, we were talking about Aaron Rodgers has something to prove. Derek Carr has something more to prove. I feel like he's probably one of the biggest quarterbacks on this list that has something to prove. You know, like I mean, you could talk about Jalen Hurts, you could talk about Josh Allen, but like Derek Carr, his team literally kicked him out with 2 games left in the season, and he's still producing some great numbers. So that's why I have Derek Carr at number 9. I think he's going to have a good season. He has something to prove, and I mean, when quarterbacks have something to prove, either they go all out, prove people wrong, or they can bite the dust.
Yep, they sink or swim. I think I definitely have no problem with you putting him where you're at, where he's at right here. Um, and I think, to be honest, I think just as easily you could put a guy like Kirk Cousins or a guy like Matthew Stafford on the Super Bowl kind of year here as well. And I think that's probably who we had here last year, or at least I had on my board here at 9 or 10. And so I don't really have any problem with it, but I think the one reason why he's not on my top 10, and he's never really kind of been in that area for me, is this kind of the Raiders conundrum that you kind of explained to me the past couple of years. And it matches the eye test when you watch them game to game, right? They're just so inconsistent. And so when you put that much pressure on the quarterback, or you put that much pressure on the defense to do what they got to do, and the team's not working together, it's really hard to see the quarterback having success and look good on the field. And like you said, some games he can have super great games and he can win the game for you. And then some games it's just not there for the offense. And I'm not sure how much of that is him, or how much of that is the coaching, or how much of that was Darren Waller being hurt, Devontae Adams not wanting to do certain things, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it's kind of just been that kind of a conundrum with the Raiders ever since he's kind of been there. And I do think that if there's one guy that could benefit from switching teams and kind of trying to play somewhere else, I think it is Derek Carr. No offense. But he's just kind of been there so long that it's just, you can only do the same thing so many times before you start questioning your sanity. So,
Yeah.
what do you want to say about that?
So the thing with the Raiders conundrum is when we lost, it's man, Derek's got to play better. You know, Derek. But when we win, it's always like, good job, Derek. It's not like he's the reason we won or the reason we lost, like some players. It's either, okay, good job, Derek. Like, that's it. Or it's, Derek Carr needs to go. Like when we lost to the Steelers, he had, I think, 3 interceptions that game. 2 of them bounced off his receiver's hands, and people are still calling for Derek Carr's head. It's like, if you see, Derek Carr intercepted, it's like, oh, gosh darn it. But if you watch the play, it's like, it hit both of Hunter Renfro's hands. Or Darren Waller's hands. It's like Foster Moreau, I think, had one maybe that game too. So it's like, come on, guys. Like, just just catch the ball. And, it's also hard because Josh Jacobs was the best running back in the league last year, too. If Josh Jacobs was average, like, on that cusp of like 8 through 12 of the running backs, Derek Carr in those 15 games might have thrown for 4,000 yards. So I also think that Josh McDaniels, like, yeah, he had Tom Brady for the longest time. And then he had to go with Mac Jones, Cam Newton for that 1 year. And then Derek Carr said, like, this is the best quarterback that he's had since Tom Brady.
Yeah.
And like maybe and Josh McDaniels has never really changed his system. He didn't really change his system when Cam Newton was there, when they really should have. Mac Jones didn't change the system. He didn't change the system when he came to Vegas. So I feel like Josh McDaniels is kind of a huge issue here. We'll see how Jimmy G can do if he can stay healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it was kind of interesting when you were talking about, I don't know if, I think it was mostly like internal fan base you were referencing when you were talking about the optics on Derek Carr.
Yep.
And I always felt the same way about Matt Ryan too. Not necessarily like it's his fault or not, because obviously it's never that kind of thing. But I always felt like, yeah, like the fan base always kind of appreciated them a little bit when he would win the game, because Matt Ryan is also one of those guys that a lot of yards could win the game with Julio and whatnot. But when we lost, it was like it's all his fault, and he's not that guy, and we need to move on. So I can understand that back and forth. But with my number 10, I hate I have to do this, but I have to do it. Desmond Ritter. No, I'm just kidding. I got Daniel Jones at number 10. I think with his success with Dabble this past year, with, like you said, not having many receiving weapons and not necessarily knowing how healthy Saquon is going to be either. Him being able to work in that offense and show that he can be a dual threat like some other guys, I think meant a lot to me personally. And not just that, but him, getting as many wins as they got with that receiving room. And honestly, the defense wasn't anything spectacular either. That meant a lot to me over the year, and just wasn't a big Daniel Jones believer, but I suppose I have to be now because, he's proved me right, or proved me wrong, I should say, and hopefully he doesn't rise up 5 more ranks and make me look dumb again.
It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Don't fool me a third time. And then, then Daniel Jones becomes the best quarterback in the league. So,
oh yeah,
that's why next year.
Jump.
Yeah, next year if he jumps to 5, you just gotta take the take. You gotta be like,
yeah,
he's gonna be the best quarterback this year.
I'll put him in number 2 if he's the 5th best quarterback.
So my number 10, it was Lamar Jackson. Now you had him at what number?
I had him at 5.
Oh, that's generous. That is generous. So, okay,
ahead,
so last year, you guys flamed me because I had Lamar Jackson not on my list. And like last year, I'm gonna admit, last year my list was kind of whack. I had Kirk Cousins as 6. Honestly, if we would have recorded that, I would have looked like a pretty good genius because Kirk Cousins did play like, potentially
pretty well in
6, 7, 8
games. Yeah.
But I also had Derek Carr above Lamar Jackson and just a bunch of other things. But my biggest thing with Lamar Jackson is, so you talked about scheme fit when you were talking, I think, about Jalen Hurts.
Yep.
And I agreed that like he does fit the scheme, but he throws so much more yards and so much better than Lamar Jackson does. Also, the year that Lamar won MVP, he threw for 3,127 yards. That is really low. That's averaging. He played in 15 games. That's averaging a little over 200 yards a game in 2019. I don't think that you can be top 5 quarterback when you average less than 200 yards per game. This is a passing league, and it's getting more so every year. And Lamar just signed the biggest deal, especially guaranteed wise, in the NFL. And is it going to be worth it? We'll find out. But you know, he's been in the league for 5 years. He's only thrown in the 4 years that he was a consistent starter over 20 touchdown passes in 2 seasons. Other than that, hasn't been that consistent. He does make some costly turnovers. His touchdown to interception ratio uh, in the last 2 years has been almost like a 1.5 to 1, which in his first 2 years of being a consistent starter, that was almost 3 to 1, almost 4 to 1 actually, doing some quick mental math.
Mhm.
But also, he's also had injury issues in the last 2 years. And, I kind of, a small factor I took is what's your production worth your contract? That's something that kind of I looked into, and that's a big reason why Lamar's also at 10 is he's not a throwing quarterback, which is what you need in this league. And also his production wise, and staying healthy is not worth the contract he just got. I think the Baltimore Ravens signed him because they were like, okay, we need to make sure that we keep this quarterback because grass ain't greener on the other side. We already know.
Right. Yeah, I think those are some good points to bring up. I didn't really factor contract in these rankings. I kind of just ranked it based off of play. But if we were to rank contracts, I would probably have them closer to. I mean, I would definitely have them closer to 10 than to 5. But if we're taking it into a definite account, I'd probably have him outside or maybe 9 or 10, kind of where you have him. But um, I think here's my thing about him throwing and passing, and I'm kind of gonna relate it to an NBA comparison. To me, Lamar Jackson is a DeMar DeRozan of the NFL. So he's not. DeMar DeRozan's going to take mid rangers all day, and he'll take maybe 1 3 a game, maybe two on a rare night. I don't think just because he doesn't shoot them or doesn't throw the long passes that he can't do it. I think if you can be one of the best at your position, or I guess not position, at one of the best at I don't want to say running, but just kind of more that different kind of not throwing so much, right? If you can shoot the mid range more than you shoot the three, and you can be one of the best at it, then I don't think there's a reason to go one way or the other or go further from what's working, right? So I don't have any really problem with the statistics themselves as long as they're winning games and that MVP or he was winning games. So if they're winning games with how he plays, that's kind of what's important to me ultimately, and that's kind of what I've headlined as my number one factor when I do these rankings is winning, along with talent and things like that. But when you talk about a guy that has a talent of his that just kind of he doesn't really pass, and I do think it does have to play a little bit into they don't really have receivers. They never have had a real number one receiver to give him. A guy like Jalen Hurts, had Devontae Smith, or I guess they got Devontae Smith, and then he got AJ Brown in the second year, and you saw what he looked like with an off a wide receiver. So and I don't think Odell is going to be anything close to what AJ Brown is going to be, or I don't think we should expect that either. And I mean, with how the Ravens run their offense, they're not going to give Lamar a number one receiver, and then we're not really going to, I don't think, ever see that. And hopefully Zay Flowers can be that speed guy that he can, launch the ball to. But yeah, I just think it's not necessarily that he can't do it, but he just doesn't, and so it may look like he can't. And I think that's kind of the reason why his yards look like that.
Yeah. But like, here's the thing: his yards is going to have to look better now that they got Odell, who is probably the best number one receiver that he's had in his career so
I
far.
think so. It's the best receiver he's had. Yeah.
Yep. And then you got a true slot guy like a Zay Flowers. You still have Mark Andrews, who you can debate
Yeah.
top three tight end. So he's going to have options to throw the ball to this year. And he still had a bunch of guys come back. So he's going to have to average at least 250 yards a game and like 2 touchdowns a game in order for me, maybe not two, almost 2 touchdowns, in order for me to even keep him on my list for next year. Like he's got to, unless if he just wins every single game, like the stats has been going down, in my opinion, almost every year
Mm-hmm.
ever since his MVP year. And you can't say that for a lot of the other guys. A lot of the other guys, haven't been in the league as long. But I mean, even with Joe Burrow, he got hurt his rookie year, progressed into a, a great player, and then progressed into almost an MVP caliber player, like you said earlier, if he didn't have that one bad game against the Steelers.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I definitely agree. The production's going to have to come up. And not only that, but I think he's going to have to be healthy too. I think this is really the last year where me and a lot of other people are saying, this is kind of the year to prove that you can be healthy. If you're not healthy after this year, after sitting games last year, then I can't trust you to be healthy long term. And we'll kind of dig into his situation later and kind of what we think about that. But yeah, I think he's going to have to be healthy. And you're right, he's going to have to be productive.
Yeah. So that was our top 10 list. We had some players that were pretty similar, but a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
differences. The major one, you had Lamar at 5, I had him 10. I had
Yep.
Lawrence at 3, you had him at 8. Other than that, everyone was, I think, like one
I had
spot.
Deshaun. You had
Yeah,
Derek Carr.
yeah. And
Yep.
then so yeah, so we did have some good differences and some similarities. So
Yeah.
but once again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP and follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast. And check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. I've been Sam Holcroft.
And Payton Thompson.
Thanks for listening.